I stared at the letter in my hand, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers. The words, termination of employment, glared back at me in bold print, while the sounds of celebration echoed from the grand ballroom just down the hall. Tessa, let's be honest here, Dean said, leaning back in his chair, swirling amber liquid in his tumbler. You've been good, but not irreplaceable. Anyone with basic people skills could do what you do. The office wall behind him was newly adorned with photos from industry awards and magazine features, all showcasing Dean's visionary leadership during his 20 years at the company. I built the entire client management system, I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. Our retention rates tripled. He waved his hand dismissively. Systems, paperwork, client hand-holding, that's all basic stuff. The real genius is in the product development and strategic vision. He tapped his temple. That's where the magic happens. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see the elaborate anniversary preparations. A banner reading, "Celebrating 20 years of excellence," hung above a champagne tower. Industry leaders and journalists were already arriving, eager to toast Dean's success. Your final paycheck includes 2 weeks severance, he continued, already scrolling through his phone. Though honestly, that's generous considering your performance reviews. My performance reviews? The same ones where he'd crossed out my innovations and labeled them as standard procedure improvements. You know what? Dean suddenly looked up. You should stay for the party. Have some champagne. Network a little. Might help you land on your feet. The casual cruelty of his suggestion made my chest tighten. He wasn't even aware of the humiliation he was offering, a chance to celebrate his triumph while clutching my termination letter. Thanks, but I should get my things, I replied. He shrugged. Probably better anyway. Tonight's about success stories, not, well. His eyes flicked to the termination letter in my hand. Security will supervise your desk clearing. Company policy. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Oh, and I'll need your system notes before you go. The client contact schedules, your process documents, all of it. I paused at the doorway. There aren't any. What do you mean? 6 years of client management? And you didn't document anything? I met his eyes. You always said paperwork was a waste of time. That results were all that mattered. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe even the first hint of concern. But it vanished quickly beneath his signature confidence. Well, it can't be that complicated, he said with a dismissive laugh. Like I said, anyone could do what you do. As the security guard watched me pack my personal items into a cardboard box, the ballroom down the hall erupted in applause. Dean was beginning his speech. Through the thin walls, I could hear him thanking everyone who had contributed to his success. My name never came up. I walked out of the building with my small box of belongings, passing the valets, parking luxury cars and caterers, wheeling in trays of hors d'oeuvres. One of them, a longtime client's wife, recognized me and waved. I managed a small smile in return. Nobody at the company knew what I'd actually built, not even me until that moment. Wait, before I tell you how this story unfolds, take a second to tap that like button if you've ever been underestimated. Subscribe to hear more stories about justice finally being served. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for how this ends. My name is Tessa Wright, and until 3 hours ago, I was the client relations director at a company that developed specialized technology solutions. I'm 34, live alone with my cat, Pixel, and have spent the last 6 years building something no one understood, not even me, until today. I've always been the person who remembers the details, not just birthdays and coffee orders, but the subtle threads that connect people to each other. I notice patterns in relationships that others miss. When I started at the company, client retention was abysmal. The products were innovative, but clients felt like numbers. They complained about feeling misunderstood and undervalued. The previous 3 people in my position had failed to solve this problem. Dean hired me after a 20-minute interview where he spent 15 minutes talking about himself. When I asked about the client issues, he said, "They're just being sensitive. The product should sell itself." I quickly discovered the problem wasn't sensitivity. It was a fundamental misalignment. Our development team created products based on technical possibility rather than actual client needs. The sales team promised capabilities that were technically true but practically useless for specific clients. I began building bridges, not with fancy software or complicated protocols, but with a human-centered approach that no one had tried before. I created a system where client communication didn't just flow through designated channels, but formed a responsive network. Each client had unique rhythms when they needed attention, when they preferred space, how they processed information. I mapped these patterns and taught my small team to recognize them too. We adjusted our communications, deliveries, and support accordingly. The results were immediate. Complaints decreased, renewals increased, client referrals doubled, then tripled. Dean took all the credit. At quarterly meetings, he presented my innovations as his leadership initiatives. When industry magazines requested interviews about the company's remarkable turnaround, he never mentioned me. I told myself it didn't matter. I loved the work and took pride in the relationships I'd built. Until today, the evening after my termination, I sat in my apartment staring at the skyline through my window. My phone remained silent. I wasn't expecting calls. No one at the company would miss me until they needed something. I made tea and considered my options. I had savings, a decent resume, connections in the industry. I could find another position easily enough. What I couldn't replace was the intricate web I'd spent 6 years weaving. I wasn't just a client relations director. I was the unseen architecture holding everything together. Every client interaction flowed through channels I'd designed, relationships I'd nurtured, methods I'd created but never documented, because Dean had always dismissed excessive paperwork. My team followed my lead but didn't understand the underlying principles. They knew the what, but not the why. Dean had repeatedly denied my requests for proper training resources, calling it unnecessary overhead. Morning came with unexpected developments. My phone chimed with a text from Zoe, my former assistant. Something weird is happening. Bristol Industries is threatening to pull their contract. Dean is furious. What did you do with the client communication schedule? I hadn't done anything with it. The schedule existed only in my system of notes and memory patterns, a method Dean had mocked as playing secretary, rather than recognizing as the complex relationship mapping it was. By noon, 3 more messages arrived from team members, each more panicked than the last. Tessa, where are the notes on the Wyatt project preferences? Did you change the access to the client priority matrix before leaving? Dean is asking for your contact information. Should I give it to him? I responded only to the last one, telling Zoe she could share my personal number. Then I turned off my phone and went for a long walk in the park. When I returned and powered my phone back on, I had 11 missed calls from the office and 1 voicemail from Dean himself. Tessa, this is ridiculous. Whatever game you're playing needs to stop. The Bristol situation is getting out of hand. Call me immediately. I didn't call back. There was no game. I had simply stopped being the invisible support structure for a system no one valued until it started collapsing. The next morning brought more calls. By evening, my voicemail was full. Text messages ranged from demanding to pleading. The company was in crisis. And somehow, everyone believed I had orchestrated it. On the 3rd day, after the missed call count hit 63, I finally answered. Hello, Dean. What did you do? His voice vibrated with barely controlled rage. Nothing, I replied truthfully. I simply stopped doing everything you never valued. Don't play innocent. Clients are walking away. Bristol is threatening legal action over missed deadlines they claim weren't communicated. The Wyatt project is imploding because apparently you changed all the delivery protocols before leaving. I didn't change anything, I said calmly. Those protocols were always mine. The schedules, the communication patterns, the relationship mapping, none of it was company property because you repeatedly refused to allocate resources to formalize it. Silence hung between us for several heartbeats. You need to come back and fix this, he finally said, his tone shifting from accusation to something approaching desperation. Fix what exactly? You said anyone could do what I do. Tessa, please. His voice dropped lower. The board is asking questions. The anniversary celebration was supposed to launch our biggest year ever. Now, everything's unraveling. For the first time in 6 years, Dean was speaking to me like a person who mattered. I'll think about it, I said, and ended the call. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, writing down every element of the system I'd created, every connection point, every relationship pattern, every communication rhythm. 6 years of work filled page after page. I realized I'd built something remarkable. Not a simple client management process, but an intricate ecosystem of human connections that appeared deceptively straightforward from the outside. Dean had never bothered to understand it. He saw only the results, not the architecture behind them. As I closed my notebook, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Dean calling. It was Vivian, the chairwoman of the board. Tessa, right? Vivian's voice was crisp and authoritative, with none of Dean's desperation. This is Vivian Langley. I'd like to meet with you tomorrow. I'd only seen Vivian from a distance at company events. She ran the board with legendary precision, having built 3 successful tech companies before taking her current position. Everyone knew she'd hand-selected Dean 20 years ago to run this company. May I ask what this is regarding? I kept my voice neutral. I think you know exactly what it's regarding, she replied. My driver will pick you up at 9 a.m. Text this number your address. She hung up before I could respond. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this a legal threat? A negotiation? Maybe an attempt to secure whatever they thought I'd taken from the company? At precisely 9 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside my apartment building. The driver opened the door without speaking, and 20 minutes later, we arrived at a small, nondescript cafe in a quiet neighborhood, not the corporate headquarters I'd expected. Vivian sat alone at a corner table, no papers or devices in front of her, just 2 cups of coffee. She looked different than she did at company events, less polished, more observant. She gestured to the chair across from her. Black with 1 sugar, correct? She said as I sat down. I nodded, surprised she knew how I took my coffee. I make it a point to notice details, she said, answering my unspoken question. Something you and I have in common, I suspect. She took a sip from her cup, studying me. Tell me what you built, Tessa. Not what happened or what did you do, but what you built. The phrasing caught me off guard. A relationship architecture, I said after a moment. A human-centered system that mapped how our clients operate, their communication preferences, decision-making rhythms, pressure points, and connection needs. And you never documented this system? I tried. 3 times I proposed formalizing it into company protocols. 3 times Dean rejected it as unnecessary overhead. Vivian nodded slowly. And now the system is failing because… It's not failing, I corrected her. It's absent. The system was essentially me, my observations, my connections, my methods taught informally to my team. Without me there to guide it, everyone's reverting to standard procedures, which our clients haven't experienced in years. And you didn't sabotage anything on your way out? I didn't need to. I met her gaze directly. Dean sabotaged himself by never valuing what he couldn't see. She smiled then, a small, measured expression. Precisely what I suspected. Tell me, did you ever meet Dean's predecessor? The question seemed to come from nowhere. No, he left before I joined. His name was Walter. Brilliant product mind, terrible with people. Sound familiar? She sipped her coffee. 20 years ago, Walter created a revolutionary product architecture, but couldn't build the team to execute it. The board brought in Dean, charismatic, confident, perfect for rallying people around Walter's vision. She leaned forward slightly. Do you know what happened next? I shook my head. 3 months after Dean arrived, Walter was gone. Dean presented Walter's entire framework as his own creation, a fresh vision for the company. The board knew, of course, but Walter had alienated too many people. Dean brought stability and growth, so we let the narrative stand. My mind raced. Dean's celebrated 20-year legacy was built on someone else's innovation. History repeats itself, Vivian continued. For 2 decades, Dean has taken credit for other people's work. His real talent isn't innovation, it's appropriation. He identifies valuable people, extracts their best ideas, then discards them when they start to recognize their own worth. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're different. You built something he couldn't steal, because he couldn't even see it. She set down her cup. The board meeting is Monday. Dean claims you've orchestrated some kind of sabotage. He wants to pursue legal action. My stomach tightened. That's ridiculous. I didn't take or destroy anything. I know, Vivian said calmly, but Dean needs a scapegoat. His precious anniversary celebration has turned into a disaster. 3 major clients have already terminated their contracts. The Wyatt project imploded yesterday when their CEO discovered that promises Dean made weren't actually in the contract. She checked her watch. So here's my proposition. Come back, not to your old position, but as Client Integration Director, reporting directly to me. Triple your previous salary, equity options, and a seat at the leadership table. The offer was stunning. Everything I'd worked for, recognition, authority, proper resources for my team. Yet something felt wrong. And Dean? I asked. Dean will remain CEO for now. The optics of removing him immediately after his 20-year celebration would be problematic. I pictured returning to the office, working alongside the man who had dismissed me so casually, watching him take partial credit for any recovery my system created. I need to think about it, I said finally. Vivian nodded. You have until Sunday evening. My number is in your phone now. She stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. Tessa, Dean doesn't know I'm meeting with you. I'd prefer to keep it that way. After she left, I sat alone, my coffee growing cold. The power to reclaim my position, with advancement, was now in my hands. Yet instead of triumph, I felt hollow. On my walk home, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Tessa, it's Hal from Bristol Industries. Heard you left. This explains the chaos. Call me, we should talk. Hal Porter was the operations director at Bristol, our largest client. I'd worked closely with him for 5 years, navigating his company's complex approval processes and communication quirks. If Bristol was truly threatening to walk away, that alone would send our company's stock plummeting. I called him from a bench in the park. There she is, Hal said warmly when he answered. What happened? One day everything's running smoothly. The next we're getting generic emails and missed deadlines. I was let go, I said simply. Dean felt my role wasn't essential. Hal's laugh was sharp and disbelieving. Not essential? You're the only reason we've stayed with your company for the past 4 years. After that implementation disaster with the new system, we were ready to walk until you stepped in. I remembered that crisis well. Dean had pushed through a new product release before it was ready, ignoring warnings from the development team. When Bristol received a half-functional system, I'd spent 3 weeks on-site, working directly with their team to salvage the relationship. Dean took me to dinner last week to celebrate his anniversary milestone, Hal continued. Spent the whole time talking about his client-first philosophy and how he personally designed the service approach that kept us happy all these years. My grip tightened on the phone. That service approach was my creation, built from countless hours observing how Bristol operated, identifying their unique needs, and designing custom communication protocols. We've started looking at other vendors, Hal said. But honestly, we'd rather follow you. Any chance you're joining one of your competitors? His question planted a seed, one that would grow into something I hadn't considered. Not yet, I said carefully, but I'll keep you posted. By the time I arrived home, I had 6 similar messages from contacts at other client companies. Word was spreading about my departure, and with it, connections I had built were reaching out directly. These weren't just professional relationships. Over years, I'd learned about their children's accomplishments, shared book recommendations, remembered details about their vacation plans. I'd built real connections, while Dean had collected business cards and taken credit for retention numbers. My phone rang again. Dean, for the 4th time today. This time I answered. The board meeting is Monday, he said without preamble, his voice strained. Fix this, and we can discuss your return. Same position, 10% raise. That's your offer? I kept my voice even. What do you want, Tessa? 15%? Fine. But you need to come in tomorrow to start damage control. Bristol is threatening to leave, and they're making noise to other clients. My system wasn't broken, Dean. It was dismissed, just like I was. For God's sake, he snapped, his composure cracking. I've built this company for 20 years. I'm not going to let some glorified customer service rep destroy my legacy over hurt feelings. There it was, the same contempt, just more openly displayed now that he needed something from me. Your legacy, I repeated softly. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not the clients, not the company, your reputation. Don't psychoanalyze me, he hissed. Just name your price. I thought about Vivian's offer, about Hal's call, about the notebook filled with the architecture of relationships I'd built over 6 years. I'll come to your office tomorrow, I said finally. 9 a.m. Good, he exhaled with audible relief. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork for your reinstatement. I didn't say I was coming back, I corrected him. I said I'd come to your office. We'll talk then. I ended the call before he could respond and turned to my notebook. For hours, I wrote detailed maps of every major client relationship, not just contact information and contract details, but the intricate human ecosystem I'd built. By midnight, I had clarity. What I'd created wasn't just a client management system. It was a relationship blueprint that no one else in the company understood, a blueprint I could rebuild anywhere. Morning arrived with a decision I never expected to make. I dressed professionally, gathered my notes, and prepared to face Dean one more time, not as a dismissed employee desperate for her job back, but as someone who finally understood her true value. As I stepped into the lobby of the building I'd left just days before, several employees stopped to stare. Whispers followed me to the elevator. The company was in crisis mode, all because they had never recognized what they had until it was gone. Dean was waiting in his office, tension evident in the tight line of his shoulders as he stared out the window. When I entered, he turned with an expression carefully composed to appear conciliatory. "Tessa, thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair. "Let's discuss your return." I remained standing. "First, I'd like to understand exactly what's happening with the clients." His false smile faltered. "Bristol is threatening to terminate. Wyatt already has. 3 others are reviewing their options. Satisfied? And the board meeting Monday? A formality," he said dismissively. "Once we announce your return, things will stabilize." I studied him, the man who had built his 20-year career, taking credit for other people's work. The man who had discarded me without a second thought, only to discover he'd cut out the heart of his company's success. "I won't be returning, Dean." His face darkened instantly, the conciliatory mask dropping away. "What do you mean, you won't be returning? After everything I've offered?" "Everything you've offered," I repeated slowly. "A 10% raise, my old position, the chance to fix the mess you created by undervaluing my work for 6 years. 15%, he corrected, leaning forward. "And let's be honest, Tessa, you built a decent client communication system, but it's hardly revolutionary. Once you explain it to the team, they'll implement it easily enough." I couldn't help but smile. Even now, he couldn't see what was right in front of him. "That's exactly the problem, Dean. You think I built a system that can be explained in an afternoon and replicated with a few process documents." I opened my notebook and placed it on his desk. "This is what I actually built." He glanced down at the complex web of relationship mappings, communication flows, and personal connection points I'd documented for just one client. "What am I looking at?" he asked, impatience edging into his voice. 6 years of relationship architecture for Bristol Industries alone. Every decision maker, every influencer, every communication preference and personal connection. When their CFO needs detailed analytics before making decisions, but their CEO responds better to high-level summaries with visual aids. How their product team prefers late afternoon calls because mornings are devoted to development sprints. Why their legal department requires contract revisions on Thursdays, not Fridays. I flipped the page. And here's how all those preferences interconnect. How information flows through their organization. Which relationships need nurturing. At which points in the project lifecycle. The exact moment when their team is most likely to consider competing options. Dean's expression shifted as he began to grasp what he was seeing. "You couldn't steal this when you fired me because it wasn't in any company system," I continued. "It existed in my approach, my relationships, my understanding of human patterns that I taught my team through daily guidance. Guidance you repeatedly refused to formalize because you thought it wasn't worth the investment." I closed the notebook. "And Bristol is just one client. I built this for every major relationship in our portfolio." "So that's your play?" His voice hardened. "Withhold information unless we meet your demands? That's extortion, Tessa." "No, Dean. That would be if I were demanding something from you. I'm not." I tucked the notebook back into my bag. "I'm informing you that I've accepted another position." The lie came easily, surprising even me. But I'd made my decision during the night. A decision that would change everything. "With who?" His eyes narrowed. "One of our competitors? That would violate your non-compete." "Not with a competitor," I said calmly. "I'm starting my own client relationship consultancy. My non-compete prevents me from working for direct industry competitors. It doesn't prevent me from offering relationship management services across industries." His laugh was sharp and dismissive. "A consultancy? With what clients? What funding? What experience running a business?" "With the experience I gained building and maintaining the relationship architecture that kept this company profitable for 6 years, I replied. "As for clients, I've already had inquiries from several organizations interested in my approach." This wasn't entirely untrue. Hal's call had planted the seed, and several other clients had reached out expressing dismay at my departure. Dean's confidence wavered visibly. No one will hire a one-person consultancy with no track record over an established company. They might if that person was the actual architect of the relationship system they valued, I said, especially once they learn that system is no longer in place at their current vendor. His face flushed with anger. "So this is your revenge? Poach our clients?" "I'm not poaching anyone, Dean. I'm offering a service you never valued enough to properly implement or protect. If clients choose to work with me instead, that's their decision." I moved toward the door, then paused. "By the way, I had an interesting conversation with Vivian yesterday. The color drained from his face. What did she say? She told me about Walter, about how you built your 20-year legacy on someone else's innovation. I met his eyes directly. History repeats itself, doesn't it? Except this time, you can't take credit for what you can't even understand. I left him standing there, his carefully constructed image of success beginning to crumble. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I registered a business name, created a simple website, and reached out to select contacts who had expressed concern over my departure. By Sunday evening, I had 3 exploratory meetings scheduled for the following week, including one with Bristol Industries. When Vivian called for my answer to her offer, I declined politely but firmly. "I suspected you might," she said, not sounding particularly disappointed. "What will you do instead?" I explained my plan to create a relationship consultancy focused on helping companies build and maintain the kind of client architecture I'd developed. "Interesting," she said. "And if I offered you a consulting contract with our company, not as an employee, but as our first client for your new business?" The offer caught me off guard. "You want to hire my consultancy, even though I just left?" "The board doesn't care about personal grievances, Tessa. We care about results. Dean's 20-year celebration has turned into a 20-day crisis. We need to stabilize our client relationships, and you're clearly the best person to help us do that." "Working directly with Dean would be challenging," I said carefully. "You wouldn't be. You'd work with me and the client teams directly." Her tone shifted slightly. "Dean's position is being reevaluated in light of recent events." I considered the offer. Taking the company on as a client would provide immediate income security for my new venture. It would also place me in the position of teaching others the very system Dean had dismissed as unimportant. "I'll consider it," I said, "after the board meeting tomorrow." "Fair enough," Vivian replied. "I'll call you afterward." Monday morning, I sat in a coffee shop across from the company headquarters, watching people stream into the building. Many looked tense, hurried. News of the client crisis had clearly spread throughout the organization. At 10 a.m., when the board meeting was scheduled to begin, my phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Something big is happening. Dean looks terrible. Everyone's talking about you." I hadn't told anyone on my team about my plans, but word had obviously spread that I'd visited Dean's office on Friday. At 11:30, another text arrived, this time from Hal at Bristol. "Just got a call from your board chairwoman. Very interesting conversation. Call me when you can." By noon, social media was buzzing with industry chatter. Someone had leaked that multiple clients were leaving the company following the departure of a key executive. The stock price had dropped 8% before noon. At 1:15 p.m., my phone rang. "Vivian, the board meeting just concluded," she said without preamble. "Dean has been removed as CEO, effective immediately." I nearly dropped my coffee. "Removed? I thought you said that would be problematic after the anniversary celebration." "That was before we learned the full extent of the situation," Vivian replied. "After our conversation, I spoke with several key clients directly. They made it very clear that their relationships were with you, not with the company, and certainly not with Dean." She continued. "When confronted with this reality in the board meeting, Dean did not respond well. He accused you of sabotage, claimed you'd violated company policies, and demanded legal action." "None of that is true," I said quickly. "We know." That's when I revealed that I'd already spoken with you and several clients. Dean became unprofessional. He claimed his 20 years of leadership was being undermined by, and I quote, "a glorified secretary who got lucky with a few client handshakes." I winced at the words, so similar to what he'd said during my termination. "At that point," Vivian continued, "I shared something with the board that I'd been holding on to for quite some time, documentation of how Dean had systematically taken credit for other people's work throughout his tenure, including original emails between him and Walter from 20 years ago." My mind raced. "You had those all this time? Why didn't you act sooner?" "The company was succeeding," she said simply. "The board's primary responsibility is to shareholders, not to moral justice." But when Dean's behavior began threatening the company's stability and client relationships, that calculation changed. She paused. "My offer still stands, Tessa. We'd like to engage your consultancy to rebuild the client architecture you created. The board has approved a substantial budget for this project." 4 hours later, I sat across from Dean in a nearly empty restaurant. He had texted me repeatedly after the board meeting, his messages evolving from angry accusations to desperate pleas for a conversation. Against my better judgment, I had agreed to meet him. He looked shattered. his carefully maintained image of success crumbling visibly. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by a man facing the collapse of his 20-year facade. "You planned this," he said as soon as I sat down, his voice low and strained. "Somehow you orchestrated all of it." I shook my head. "I didn't orchestrate anything, Dean. I simply stopped pretending that my work wasn't valuable." "They're offering you my job, aren't they?" His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "No, they're hiring my consultancy to rebuild what you dismantled when you fired me." He stared at me in disbelief. "Your consultancy?" "Yes. Starting next week, I'll be teaching your former employees how to maintain the relationship architecture I built. Only this time, it will be properly documented, valued, and protected." "So that's your revenge," he said bitterly. "Taking over my company." "Not at all," I replied calmly. "Your company is just my first client. I've already scheduled meetings with 3 others this week, including Bristol Industries." The realization dawned slowly on his face. "You're not just rebuilding what you had at the company. You're building something completely new." "Yes, something you never recognized the value of, even when it was right in front of you." He was silent for a long moment. "I never thought. I didn't realize." "That's the point, Dean. You never did." 6 months later, my consultancy had grown to a team of 7, with clients across 3 industries. The company that had fired me was thriving under new leadership that valued relationship architecture as much as product development. Dean had taken early retirement, his 20-year legacy overshadowed by the spectacular client exodus that followed my departure. My revenge wasn't about destroying Dean or even punishing him. It was about building something he could never take credit for, something he couldn't even comprehend because he'd never bothered to look beyond his own reflection. The true revenge was simply allowing him to experience the consequences of his own arrogance. The system I built wasn't software or documents. It was an intricate web of human connections he had been too dismissive to notice or understand. In the end, I didn't need to tear down what Dean had built. I just needed to stop holding it up. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or had your contributions dismissed, remember this. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't fighting back. It's simply stepping aside and letting gravity do its work. Success isn't about who gets the credit. It's about knowing your true value. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and share your own experience in the comments. The best revenge isn't just living well. It's building something entirely your own.